I'm Shawna Rosner, your host of In-House Counsel Chronicles. Today, my guest is Jessica Cohen. Jessica received her BA from Harvard University, a Master's of Public Policy and Administration from Northwestern University, and her JD from Cleveland State University College of Law. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
So glad to have you. I know that your trajectory to where you are now is a little bit unconventional in the sense that you had another career before you went to law school. I kind of did the opposite. I went to law school and then had a different career. So love to hear about that. Tell us about your career prior to going to law school.
Yes, I am, I guess what you would call a mid-career lawyer. So after about 12 years in the public and nonprofit sectors, I made the decision at 34 or so to go to law school. And I always wanted to be a lawyer, but as you know, many people happens to many people after undergrad, life happens. I got married, I had kids, I had started my career in the nonprofit sector after working for Congress, for my congresswoman from Long Island, New York, for a number of years. And I really loved the nonprofit sector. I did government advocacy, fundraising, external affairs for a variety of nonprofits over that time. But I found myself being asked all the time whether I was a lawyer. And I found myself gravitating towards projects and things where I was engaging with other lawyers. And when my youngest at the time was 4 years old, I thought to myself, I could still be a lawyer. I have decades left to work. I should probably do this because I can either, go to law school and be a lawyer when I'm in my late 30s, or I could be in my late 30s and still be doing what I'm doing today. And so that's what caused me to make the switch.
And then you had another child, right? During law school. I kind of remember that to be the case.
Yep, I had my fifth. She's now almost 3, and she was born between my 3rd and 4th year at Cleveland State.
Wow, that is really remarkable for someone who did go through law school. Myself, I just cannot even imagine that, but give you a lot of credit. And you started working for Verizon, where you are now, during law school, correct?
Yes, I came on. So I was working for a tech startup when I first started law school that did not start up. And so I joined Verizon kind of in the middle of my 1L year, which was amazing. Were so supportive of me being in law school at night. And I was specifically hired to do external affairs for the company here in Ohio. So I was overseeing their corporate philanthropy, their external affairs. It was also during COVID, so that was an interesting time to do external affairs for any organization. And I loved that work. And I did that for about 3 years, basically through the rest of my law school journey at CSU.
So was the telecommunications industry of particular interest to you?
No. And I used to joke when I first started at the company that I didn't even know that wireless meant there has to be wires for your cell phones to work. I didn't know how cell phones worked. I didn't know anything about the communications field. I mean, my background had been primarily in education policy for the most part at the nonprofits that I had worked for. I worked with the Department of Education. I had never done anything with the FCC or the FTC or any of the other federal agencies that I do work with today. And so that was a huge learning curve. Like I knew how to work with nonprofits, and I knew how to oversee philanthropy, and I knew how to do external affairs. But I really had to gain a lot of knowledge about the telecom industry and what it even means, right? Like, what are the products we sell? What are the services we provide? What does it mean to be a critical infrastructure company? All those are, really big parts of what it means to work at a Fortune 50 telecom company.
And then you stayed, and your title is Counsel. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so everybody knew I was in law school. It was not a secret at the company, and I very much shared with folks along my journey that I wanted to stay, if at all possible. On one hand, I felt very old to be going back to be an associate at a firm, even though I had contemplated that. It seemed like that would not maybe be the best fit for me and my family, both professionally and personally. But at the same time, I think the bigger motivation for me was that I love Verizon and I love working for the company. And just because I made this huge kind of monumental shift in my education and where I wanted to use my skills, I did not want to leave. I wanted to stay. So I was very, very fortunate that at the time that I was graduating law school, and like every corporation, there's restructuring and reorganization, and they were looking for some more bench strength on their regulatory affairs organization, which is within the larger public policy organization at Verizon. And that's where I was anyway. I was just in a different part doing different work. And essentially I was asked, would you like to move over and then maybe do some legal work? Once I had I think 2 months to graduate or a month to graduate, and then 6 months until you get the bar results here in Ohio. It takes forever. So they said, move over, you'll do the work, some different work. And then, ultimately, if you pass the bar, you can, be considered counsel here at Verizon. So it was a huge step for me. And I am deeply grateful for the confidence in me and the ability to stay with the company and do this amazing work. And we can talk more about what I do, but I love the work I'm doing now as well. So it's been a great path.
I do want to talk about the work you're doing now, but first I want to hear a little bit more about why you love Verizon so much and why you wanted to stay.
Number one, the culture, for sure. We have, bar none, the most talented, generous, kind group of lawyers and public policy leaders that I have ever encountered. And I have worked in a number of different organizations, corporate, public, and nonprofit. So this is, it's saying quite a lot that this is really the best place to work, which frankly, as someone who hadn't been in corporate before coming to Verizon, that was a surprise to me, right? You think as a nonprofit practitioner or somebody working in the public sector that corporate culture is a certain way. And yes, of course, every corporation has bits and pieces of that. But I have never been in a culture that has been so supportive of my professional growth, contemplating where I want to be, the education I was working very hard to achieve. I had, a couple really big life events in my first few years at Verizon. I had a baby. And I've had a baby in 5 babies in 4 different organizations, 4 different jobs. Verizon has 4-month, 100% paid maternity leave. I've never in any of my jobs had such a benefit. So supportive of me ramping down, ramping back up. When I got back, it could not sending me baby gifts. And, that's like small, but it's the kindness and the caring. And then on the flip side of that, I actually had my father and my grandmother passed away within 2 weeks of each other, 6 months after I had my daughter. And at the company could not have been more supportive of me, literally dropping everything. I was back and forth from Cleveland to Florida over, 6 to 8 weeks, where my grandfather and my grandmother and my father lived, dealing with all of that and family and 6-month-old baby. And, there's just like, that is life sometimes. And I will never be able to express my appreciation to my boss at the time, the company, my VP at the time, for what they did to just allow me to be with my family and do what I needed to do. And that for me, in addition to just doing really cutting edge, interesting work with people that I love to work with, the fact that they can support an employee through personal ups and downs, professional ups and downs, and everything in between, that's pretty much priceless. And that's why I love working here.
I agree. The culture is so important for people, and a supportive culture. I do want to hear more about your day-to-day in your role now.
I think it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of like other in-house counsel. And of course, I know my counterparts at other companies, but I feel like a policy lawyer at a corporation is not something that a lot of people know about per se, or law students, know about or think, oh, I want to do that. And so what we do is, we have a group of lawyers at Verizon and other policy folks that aren't lawyers, but lawyers that we review policy in different subject areas where we grow or become or are the experts, and we help uh, gain from the business what the concerns are about potential legislation, whether it's on the state, local, or the federal level. And then we work with our lobbying team and our policy teams to convey the concerns or the interests of the business. And like I joke with my kids, I basically read legislation all day, every day, red line legislation all day, every day, and sit on trade association calls where I represent the business and work with my counterparts in other big companies, tech or telecom or otherwise, and work together to think about how industry as a whole wants to approach different legislation. Again, different levels of government, different states, different topics. And my specific area for the company is AI, privacy, and cybersecurity. So that's where I really focus.
So it seems like maybe your background, though, kind of did lead you a little bit in this way, right? I would think some of that background was relevant.
I mean, I did in law school. I toyed with the idea of, maybe mergers and acquisitions or real estate law. And then, of course, I took all those classes and still none were as compelling as the work I had done in policy in terms of, regulatory law, administrative law, reading statutes and regulations, comments and rulemaking, all of those things that had been part of my life as a policy person previously in nonprofit is what I do now. But I will say there's a difference for me as I approach the work, given, that a fact that I did go to law school, that background that I didn't have to the extent that I do now from, all of those classes that I took. And just a shout out for Cleveland State and their law school. They have a cybersecurity and privacy program, which dramatically changed my interest by taking a few classes there. And I think that there, just are not enough privacy and cyber and AI lawyers right now. So that program really gave me a head start in terms of what I wanted to do ultimately in practicing, and giving me the foundational knowledge so I could jump right in. And I told Lee Fisher that, and I've told my professors that also. I really was able to jump in on day one with a background and a foundational knowledge that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Lee Fisher being the dean of the law school while you were there, who's departing and going on to something else. But I did hear that they had that program. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So the current now he's the current dean, but Professor Brian, or the current co-dean, but Professor Brian Ray really spearheaded that at Cleveland State and developed this program where both as a JD student you can get a certificate on top of your JD, or there's a Master of Legal Studies program. And I'll leave it to folks to dig into the details on the website or contact the school, but in essence, for a certain amount of credits, they provide they provide a wide variety of classes, both privacy law, so privacy management, privacy law itself, cybersecurity law, but also I think one of the requirements, or at least it was when I was doing it, was taking a cybersecurity class where you actually were with a cybersecurity technical professor, an adjunct professor, who taught you how to hack into your own computer and get a feel for what does it mean to actually be on the offensive side, of cybersecurity, and what does that mean from the law. And there was also a professor that did cyber crime, which was super interesting and more like Fourth Amendment. And that actually played right into, some of the things, not that I deal with every day, but certainly on the periphery of what I do now when it comes to wiretapping and, things like that, just to be aware of. That was a huge help as well.
So I want to ask a little bit more about your role and the focus particularly on AI. Yeah. What do you think are some misconceptions maybe that people have about AI?
Yeah, so there are right now, so the state legislative sessions started in January or so across the country. I do most of my work right now is on state legislation. And I believe right now the count is up to over 1,000 AI bills that have been introduced at some point since January 1st. So this is a topic area that everybody wants to regulate or everybody wants to legislate. And I think one interesting misconception is that AI is like new. Gen AI is new, generative AI is new in the last couple of years. But AI, like algorithms and things like that, have been part of technology for years and years. And so what we're seeing in legislation, which I have found very interesting, is kind of this move by legislators to regulate AI, but inadvertently including, using definitions that are so broad and expansive that they're catching, algorithms, again, that underpin technology we use every day, when really what the objective is of the legislation is to either regulate high risk use of AI or think about how we want to disclose AI. But I'll just give you an example. Some bills that we're seeing, they would like businesses to disclose every use of AI with some sort of disclaimer, and this, I'm just abroad, we've seen this in a couple different states. But then you have to think, if I use Gemini, for example, to polish an ad that a small business is putting in a local newsletter, do I need to put this highly detailed disclaimer that this statute, this lawmaker is trying to put into statute on my ad? And I was joking around, like if a plumber, or using this as an example, like if a plumber uses Chat GPT or another AI image generator to put a toilet in his small business ad, like, does he have to put the disclaimer on the ad? But that's not really what are the legislators trying to do? But now AI is so prolific and everybody's using it for everything that the impact is just of some of these proposed regulations would just be extraordinary, right, on our everyday use of technology. So that's been very interesting to watch this session as we've looked at different pieces of legislation and heard from a lot of different legislators across the country.
Sure. I do hear that in conversations lately of people saying, I'm not sure, what do I have to disclose if I'm using generative AI? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding or confusion around that at this point in time. It's not clear for people. But why is it important to have regulations at all around AI?
So I think there's a lot of different opinions right now, and you'll see that on the federal level and the state level. And it's not even really across, not even bounded by party lines anymore. I just think there's a general concern about technology that we don't know where it's going to go, and that compels legislators to think about how we can regulate it before it is unregulatable. I guess I've heard that argument, right? Like the internet, did we wait too long to regulate the internet? Are we waiting too long? And then on the flip side, the other argument is this is generative AI, at least, and agentic AI, which is coming up. These are all very nascent technologies. What happens if we overregulate right now? What does that do to innovation? If one state overregulates, what does that do to business and innovation in that state as opposed to the 49 other states that don't have that type of regulation? You may have heard the Congress is contemplating a 10-year moratorium on AI regulation. That's been hotly contested, yes, in the budget bill. So we'll see what happens in the Senate. So this is a conversation that it's not going away. The technology is not going away. And I think that we're, the adage, we're building the plane as we fly it. That's what's happening now with AI regulation.
I'm going to be staying in touch with you to follow this for sure. In terms of challenges you've faced since becoming an in-house attorney, what can you share with me there?
Yeah, so I think challenges, and I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome, but I do think that I'm in an interesting place of being a very experienced policy professional, but a very young/new lawyer. And in many cases, or, in many instances, I'm making a final call for our business, right, on a position we're taking, or I'm making a recommendation to leadership. And I feel qualified to do that for the totality of my experience. But I do think I still have that sense of a young lawyer, like, I don't know, is that right? And I do rely on colleagues sometimes. I'll phone a friend, or I had like a torts question. I went to, a colleague in the litigation department. I said, I think I remember this, but could you, tell me what you think? And so I think that's been one of the challenges I've had as a newer, younger, not age, but in experience lawyer, in-house, is just kind of getting over that hump, but also getting some support when needed and when I feel like I could use, an extra boost to make sure that I'm making the right call, even after I've thought about it from a lot of different perspectives.
Sure. And I think that is something that people that are junior going in-house face. I talk to people all the time who are looking to do that, want to go in-house as a junior attorney, or want to start off their career in-house. And I wanted to take this moment to ask you if there's any sort of advice you have for attorneys that want to take that path like you did, to go in-house right away.
I would encourage it. I know that it's not common, but I think particularly for older new lawyers or mid-career, I think it's a really rewarding way to feel like you're still progressing in your career while being able to do this major shift, right? To go from a non-lawyer to a lawyer, essentially. But even for young lawyers, I think we're seeing in corporations maybe willingness to take folks, especially in the policy area, like lawyers that are a little bit younger, so not 6 to 10 years, maybe 4 years, right? Because it's more policy, less law. But the skills that those lawyers bring, from whether they're coming from a firm or coming from the public sector, those are really important skills. And I think that anybody who's looking to go in-house should just continue to explore opportunities, throw their name in the hat when they see job postings, because I will say, especially at companies like Verizon, people stay for a very long time. And for that reason, there aren't often a lot of opportunities to come in as a new person to the company. But I do think that when opportunities arise, people should try to apply and talk to folks in the company, reach out over LinkedIn. I've talked to people who've been interested and talked to them about my experience. And I think it's always important to try, even though it's a challenging jump.
Good advice. I want to switch gears for just a minute. I know that in addition to your full-time job with Verizon, busy personal life, raising a large family, you somehow, I'm not quite sure how you do it, but you do somehow carve out time to give back to the community in a variety of ways. Why is this so important to you?
So I think that public service and just service in general has always been a part of my ethos. I definitely came from a family where, we are a Jewish family, came to the United States with a lot of gratitude for being able to escape the numerous countries that my family, escaped persecution from, and ended up here. And that gratitude, for the country, for a place of safety, for being able to thrive and succeed, not first in my family to go to college, but first to go to the Ivy League, first lawyer, in my entire family, to come from, grandparents that were tool and die makers and, blue collar workers. It's always been for me about using my talents and what I have developed for myself to help others. And I think that I've tried to do that in areas where I also am fulfilled. And I think that's important because there is limited time. There is, not endless hours, and, things that I do feel strongly about, like chairing the Cleveland Heights Planning Commission or serving on the board of Beaker Cholim, which is a Jewish health support nonprofit here in Cleveland. Those are things I do because I am passionate about the city of Cleveland Heights. I'm passionate about the Jewish community, and I want to be able to give back from my expertise.
I know we're so fortunate to have you in our community giving back. So thank you for all of your service and look forward to having you serve for many more years to come. I want to close out our conversation today by asking you if you could go back in time and give yourself advice about your career overall, what would it be?
Well, I tell my kids all the time, if you're going to go to law school, do it sooner rather than later. I don't regret the path that I've taken, but it would have been a whole lot easier if I had done it earlier. And I laugh about it now, but in the 4 years of doing law school part-time at night and then studying for the bar while working with a baby and other kids at home, I used to joke to my husband all the time, there's nobody else that's, waking up in the middle of the night with their baby to, do this, or there's nobody else that has to miss class because a kid's sick or things like that. And so it made it harder. Maybe it made it more rewarding. Maybe it means more to me, but that pivot point where I decided to not go to law school and instead go to work, I think if I had known what I know now, I might have said, nah, take the LSAT. Just do three more years and then you can go on the rest of your career.
But somehow I think that it worked out for you. Like this was the path that was meant to be, but I think that is great advice. It's really been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. And I loved our conversation. Thank you.
Me too.